At 67, Evelyn Hart sat through her husband's will, expecting grief, maybe disappointment, but not erasure. Yet in a room still heavy with funeral flowers and false condolences, she watched two smug stepsons inherit the mansion, the money, the business, the future, while the woman who had given 41 years to that family was handed a single envelope and told, with breathtaking calm, that she had 30 days to disappear. Inside that envelope was not security, not an explanation, not even an apology. It was a rusted key, the deed to a house she had never seen, and a note from the dead man who had just abandoned her to public humiliation. A note that said only this: "Go there before you judge me." What kind of husband leaves his widow looking like a discarded servant in front of his own children, then asks for trust from beyond the grave? Because the cruelty was real, the insult was public, the pain was immediate. While Evelyn packed up the only home she had known for nearly 4 decades, those men were already measuring walls, mocking her taste, talking about her life as if it were old furniture that needed to be cleared out before closing. They thought the strange house in Ashby County was an elegant final insult, a rotting property, a quiet exile, a place to send an aging woman no one planned to visit. But they were wrong, because the road waiting for Evelyn did not lead to a burial of what was left of her life. It led to a house full of silence, a locked room full of secrets, and a truth so carefully hidden that even the men who thought they had won everything never saw it coming. What Evelyn finds beyond that key is not just the answer to what her husband really did. It is the answer to who she becomes when she finally stops asking permission to exist. And by the time the people who erased her understand what was actually placed in her hands, it will already be far too late. Stay tuned. What's about to happen wasn't meant to be revealed. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment wherever you're watching. By the time the lawyers laid the envelope across the polished table, Evelyn Hart already understood that the room had been arranged to humiliate her. Her late husband's sons sat together on one side, jackets open, confident, whispering to each other with the easy greed of men who had been certain of victory long before anyone read a word aloud. On the other side sat Evelyn alone, hands folded so tightly in her lap that the knuckles had gone white. She was 67 years old, dressed in the same navy suit she had worn to Arthur's funeral 3 days earlier, and she felt as if 41 years of marriage had been reduced to a chair no one offered to move closer. "The primary residence," the attorney said carefully, "passes in full to Benjamin Hart and Daniel Hart, to be sold or retained at their discretion." Neither son looked at her. "The investment accounts, commercial holdings, and liquid reserves are to be divided equally between the same beneficiaries." Still no one looked at her. Evelyn kept waiting for the sentence that would restore shape to the world. The one that would say Arthur had not spent 4 decades letting her run his home, host his clients, smooth his temper, raise his daughter from his first marriage until the girl married and moved away, only to leave her standing outside the future like a servant dismissed without notice. Instead, the attorney cleared his throat and reached for the final page. "To my wife Evelyn Hart, I leave the property at Hollow Creek, including all fixtures, furnishings, outbuildings, and accompanying deed." Benjamin let out a quiet laugh through his nose. Daniel leaned back in his chair, satisfied now, as if the last piece had clicked into place. Evelyn frowned. "Hollow Creek?" The attorney looked at her with something too close to pity. "A rural parcel in Ashby County, an old house, approximately 2 hours from here." Benjamin finally turned toward her. "You've never heard of it because Dad never cared enough to mention it. It belonged to some branch of his mother's family. He used it for storage years ago. It's falling apart." Daniel smiled without warmth. "But at least you have somewhere to go." There it was. Not grief, not decency. Relief. The house in Briar Glen had been her home for 38 years.
She had planted the climbing roses by the east wall with her own hands. She had picked every paint colour, every curtain, every dish. She had learned which floorboard outside Arthur's study squeaked, and which tea to brew when his clients stayed too late into the evening. When his blood pressure rose, she lowered the lights and kept the room quiet. When his daughter hated her on principle, Evelyn had still shown up to dance recitals and college tours, and the first terrible Thanksgiving after the girl's mother died. She had done all of it without applause, because that was what love was supposed to look like when you were building a life instead of performing one. And now Benjamin, who had visited 3 times in 10 years, was inheriting the piano she polished every Sunday. She turned back to the attorney. "That's all?" He hesitated for one fatal second before answering. "There is also a personal note Mr. Hart asked to be enclosed with the deed." Daniel stood. "We're done here, right? Because I've got a broker coming to the house at 3. The will grants Mrs. Hart 30 days to vacate the Briar Glen property," the attorney said sharper now. "Not sooner." Benjamin shrugged. "Fine. 30 days." As if he were granting mercy. Evelyn reached for the envelope. It was thick, cream-coloured, expensive. Arthur had always liked expensive paper. Her fingers trembled, but her voice did not. Did he leave any explanation? Benjamin answered before the attorney could. "Probably the same one he told us."
"He already took care of you for half your life." The words landed harder than any slap. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate. If she spoke now, she would either scream or beg, and she would rather choke on broken glass than give them either pleasure. So she nodded once, took the envelope, and walked out of the conference room with her shoulders straight. Only in the parking garage did she open it. Inside was a rusted brass key tied with black ribbon, a folded deed, and a single sheet in Arthur's handwriting. "Evelyn, go there before you judge me. There are things I could not put in the will. Hollow Creek is yours for a reason. I am asking you, perhaps for the first time in my life, to trust me completely. Arthur." She read it twice, then a third time, and the fury rose so suddenly she had to brace herself against the concrete wall. Trust him. After 41 years of careful silences, of decisions explained only when they could no longer be challenged, of money kept organized by him and unquestioned by her because marriage had required faith somewhere, now he wanted trust from beyond the grave. She laughed once, harshly, and it echoed through the garage. Then she cried. Not elegantly, not softly. She cried with the deep, humiliating violence of a woman who realizes that the life she defended for decades may have looked entirely different from the other side of the glass. The 30 days that followed taught her exactly how little blood and loyalty had ever had to do with family. Benjamin and Daniel began arriving at the Briar Glen house almost immediately. They came with real estate agents, contractors, 2 different interior designers, and one woman with a tablet who photographed every room while speaking about light correction and neutralizing the older feminine choices. The older feminine choices were Evelyn's curtains, Evelyn's rugs, Evelyn's kitchen. One afternoon, she stood at the dining room sideboard, wrapping crystal in newspaper, while Daniel discussed knocking down the wall behind her. "Open concept," he said. "Nobody wants these boxed-in formal rooms anymore." Benjamin glanced at her reflection in the china cabinet and didn't lower his voice. "Do we have to wait the full month? The place smells like old perfume." Evelyn kept wrapping crystal. That night, she went into Arthur's dressing room and sat on the floor between rows of suits that still carried the faint, dry, expensive scent of him. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, quietly, to the dark, "You had one chance to protect me. One." The room offered no defense. On the 12th day, Arthur's daughter Claire called from Seattle. "I just heard the details," she said. Her voice was strained, uncertain. Evelyn, I didn't know." "No," Evelyn said. "No one ever knows until the reading." Claire was silent. Then, "Come stay with me." It should have sounded kind. Instead, it sounded like the offer people make when they know they will not have to live with the consequences for long. "You have 3 children and a husband who already dislikes guests," Evelyn said gently. "You have your own life. You're not a guest." Evelyn closed her eyes. Claire had called her Evelyn for 30 years. Never mother. Not once. She did not blame her for that, not anymore. But truth was truth. "I'll manage," she said. After the call, she walked through the house one last time at dusk. The long hallway with the runner she had argued Arthur into choosing. The breakfast nook where winter light always fell in a pale square across the table. The library where she had spent entire nights alone while Arthur traveled, reading novels and convincing herself solitude was a respectable kind of marriage. In the kitchen, she opened the drawer beside the stove and found the little brass measuring spoon her own mother had given her when she married. She had forgotten it was there, for some reason that nearly undid her more than the will had. By the 29th morning, her whole life fit into a mid-sized sedan. 3 suitcases, 2 boxes, a garment bag, a framed photograph of her parents on their 40th anniversary. Arthur's note remained in her purse, though she had told herself twice to throw it away. Benjamin arrived before she had loaded the last box. He stood on the front steps, coffee in hand, already dressed like a man expecting profitable conversations. "You left the keys?" "They're on the hall table." He nodded, then glanced at her car. "You're really going to that place?" Evelyn shut the trunk. "Apparently." He took a sip of coffee. "Look, if it's too rough out there, there are senior apartments in Westfield. Not glamorous, but practical." Practical. As if she were a problem to be stored efficiently. She looked at him for a long moment. "I was younger than your wife is now when I started taking care of this family. I am the reason your father could live as if his life ran by itself. Do not stand on my porch and speak to me as if I've misplaced my way home." For once, Benjamin had no answer. She got into the car and drove away without looking back. The city thinned behind her. Brick storefronts gave way to gas stations, then fields, then long empty roads lined with bare-limbed trees that scratched at a low gray sky. Ashby County arrived with almost no warning, just a leaning sign and a narrower road disappearing into woods still wet from last night's rain. Hollow Creek Road was barely a road at all. When she finally reached the gate, she thought for one stunned second that she must have the wrong place. The house stood beyond a stand of dark pines, wide and weather-beaten, its porch sagging on the left side, shutters hanging unevenly, the roof patched in places with different shades of metal. One upstairs window was boarded over. The field beside it had gone wild years ago. The whole property looked less abandoned than forgotten, like something that had been waiting too long for someone who never came. Evelyn killed the engine. No neighbors, no traffic, no voices. Only wind moving through the trees and the sound of a loose piece of gutter tapping the side of the house. She sat very still with Arthur's key in her hand. Then she opened the car door, stepped out into the cold, and walked toward whatever had been left for her. The front door resisted at first, swollen with damp and time, then gave way so suddenly Evelyn nearly stumbled into the dark. The smell hit her before her eyes adjusted. Dust, old wood, cold stone, the faint sour trace of disuse. But beneath it all was something else too, something cleaner than she expected, as if the house had not been empty so much as closed. She stood in the entry with her handbag over one shoulder and looked around. The place was bigger inside than it seemed from the road. A long central hall, a staircase with a carved banister half hidden under sheets. Tall ceilings stained by water in one corner, but still elegant. On the right, a parlor with a fireplace wide enough to stand in. On the left, what had once been a dining room, its wallpaper faded into a ghost of green vines. The furniture was old, covered in linen cloths yellowed with age. Dust lay everywhere, but not ruin, not the collapse Benjamin had smirked about, not the worthless wreck she had prepared herself to hate. She set her keys down on a narrow hall table and heard the silence answer. It was not a friendly silence, not yet, but it was hers. The electricity, to her surprise, still worked. Not well. Half the wall sconces were dead, and the kitchen light buzzed like an irritated insect. But when she found the breaker panel and tried the switches, enough of the house woke to a dim amber life that she nearly cried again. The water ran brown for a full minute before it cleared. She laughed out loud at that, alone in the kitchen, one hand on the faucet. "All right," she said to the room, "so we're both still breathing." The kitchen was the harshest shock. Narrow counters, an old iron stove pushed against one wall, cabinets painted decades ago and left to peel, a pantry door that refused to close. But the window over the sink looked out across the backfield to a stream bordered with birch, and beyond that, a line of low hills already fading blue in the late afternoon. It should have looked lonely. Instead, to Evelyn's own irritation, it looked honest. She carried in 2 suitcases, then the boxes, then the garment bag. By the time the car was empty, the cold had stiffened her hands and pulled at her lower back. She chose a downstairs bedroom because she did not trust the stairs after dark, aired the mattress by the simple act of pulling off the dust cover and opening the window, and spread a coat over the bed before sitting down heavily. The springs groaned but held. Her whole body ached. She had not lifted this much in years. She had not made a bed for herself in an unfamiliar room in more than 4 decades. She had not, if she was honest, been entirely alone in any meaningful way since she was 26 years old. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel oddly alert, as though fear had been burned off by the long drive and left behind something leaner. That first night she ate crackers from her handbag and half an apple from the cooler she had packed that morning. Then she walked through the downstairs with a flashlight, checking locks, testing windows, learning the complaints of the floorboards. In the library she found built-in shelves, mostly empty except for a few law books so old they were decorative now, and 3 ledgers stacked in a cabinet. In the parlor, she uncovered a grand piano with 2 dead keys and 1 photograph on the mantel, turned face down. She picked it up. It showed Arthur in his 30s, maybe younger, standing on this very porch beside an older woman with a severe mouth and intelligent eyes. His mother, Evelyn guessed. He was not smiling, but he looked softer than the man she had married, less armored. In pencil on the back, in a hand she did not know, were the words, "Hollow Creek, before the storm." Before what storm? She set the photograph back, very carefully. The next morning began with problems. The back door would not latch. 2 upstairs windows rattled in their frames. The refrigerator was dead. There were mouse droppings in the pantry, and one alarming patch of ceiling in the hallway that looked as if another hard rain might bring it down into the rug. By 10 o'clock she was in town buying cleaning supplies, batteries, canned soup, a hammer, light bulbs, and far more courage than any cashier could ring up. Ashby itself was little more than a main street, with a hardware store, a diner, a pharmacy, and a post office that shared a wall with the feed supply. People looked at her the way small towns look at strangers, not unfriendly, but thorough. At the hardware store, a man with silver at his temples and a work shirt stitched with the name Cal examined the list in her hand. "You moving into Hollow Creek?" he asked. Evelyn looked up. "How do you know that?" "Because nobody buys weather stripping, drain cleaner, mouse traps, and chandelier bulbs in one basket unless they're either opening a haunted inn or taking on that house." His mouth stayed straight, but his eyes were amused. "I'm not opening an inn." "Shame. Town could use the excitement." He gathered her things and added a box of heavy-duty trash bags without charging her. When she protested, he shrugged. Call it a local tax on foolish determination. I'm not sure whether to thank you or be offended. You can do both, he said. Most people do. By noon, everyone in town seemed to know the widow from the city had taken possession of the Hart place. At the diner, the waitress refilled their coffee without asking and said, "You'll want her for the furnace if he starts acting up. He complains while he works, but he fixes things proper." At the pharmacy, a woman reaching for cough drops asked, "You staying there alone?" "Yes." The woman studied her face, then nodded once in a way that felt less like concern than approval. "Good." That unsettled Evelyn more than pity would have. Back at the house, she started in the kitchen because kitchens were where control began. She scrubbed the sink until the porcelain showed through. She emptied 2 cabinets full of warped baking tins, cracked mugs, and jars so old their labels had browned into illegibility. She swept, then swept again. She opened every window she could force and let the cold move through the rooms like judgment. By late afternoon, she was standing on a chair, trying to remove a curtain rod over the sink, when someone knocked on the back door. Not banged, knocked. 3 steady raps. Evelyn climbed down carefully and opened it to find a woman about her age in a red quilted vest, holding a foil-covered casserole dish like a peace offering. "I'm Nora Bell," the woman said. "I live a mile down, over the creek. Thought you might not have cooked yet." For one absurd second, Evelyn nearly burst into tears over baked noodles. "That's very kind," she managed. Nora stepped in only when invited, looked around the kitchen once, and did not perform surprise. "Needs work," she said. "Yes." "But it's got bones." Evelyn almost smiled. "That seems to be the official local opinion." Nora set the dish down. "Official local opinion is usually louder and dumber than necessary. I prefer private judgments." She moved to the window, glanced out toward the back field, then turned back. "Did Arthur ever bring you here?" "No." Nora's face changed slightly. Not shock, confirmation. "I wondered." "You knew my husband?" "Knew of him, saw him here now and then, never long. He kept to himself, paid cash for repairs when he needed them, asked too few questions and answered fewer." That sounded exactly like Arthur. Nora's gaze drifted toward the hall. He spent most of his time in the west room. The library? The room with the blue door upstairs. Evelyn frowned. "I haven't been all the way through yet." Nora was quiet a moment too long. "When you do, don't let the mess scare you, and don't throw papers away until you've read them." A strange chill moved over Evelyn's arms. What papers? But Nora was already reaching for her gloves. "Eat while it's hot, and if your pipes freeze, call me before you call a man. Men in this county turn every simple problem into a sermon." After she left, Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the casserole dish, then at the dark hallway beyond. At dusk, with the house already settling into its night sounds, she took the flashlight and climbed the stairs. The blue door was at the far end of the corridor, half hidden behind a rolled carpet and 2 old trunks. The knob stuck. The hinges screamed when she forced it open. The room beyond was not a bedroom at all. It was an office, or had been. A large oak desk faced the window. Filing cabinets lined one wall. Boxes were stacked almost to shoulder height, some neatly labeled, others not at all. Dust covered everything, but the order beneath the dust was unmistakable. Arthur had not come here to hide from the world. He had come here to work. On the desk lay a single envelope with her name on it, written in the same precise hand as the note in the parking garage. "Evelyn, if you are standing in this room, then you finally did what I should have asked of you years ago. You came without me." She stared at the words, the house silent around her,
the fading light turning the window black. Then she sat down at the desk and opened the rest. Inside the envelope was a letter 6 pages long. The first line was enough to make her shut her eyes.
I loved you badly, which is to say, I loved you without courage. And the woman can starve on that as surely as on indifference. She read it once, standing, then again seated, then a third time with both hands flat on the desk, as if the wood might steady her. Arthur wrote that Hollow Creek had belonged to his mother. Not the Heartline, not the business, not the sons who spoke about legacy as if they had forced it with their own hands. Her name had been Miriam Vale Hart, and before Arthur's father turned money into a family religion, Miriam had used the house quietly, almost invisibly, to help women who had nowhere respectable to fall. Widows with debts. Wives sent away with too little cash and too much shame. Daughters who needed a room for 6 months and a reason not to disappear. The ledgers downstairs, the boxes, the filing cabinets, the notes bundled in ribbon, all of it had been hers first. After she died, Arthur wrote, his father shut the place up and called it sentimental waste. Arthur had kept it, not out of bravery, but because it was the only thing in his life that still felt true. Over the years, while Benjamin and Daniel learned the loud language of acquisition, Arthur had moved a quiet portion of his holdings into a private trust anchored to Hollow Creek. Land leases, road easements, dividend accounts, a reserve large enough to restore the house 10 times over if someone had the will. He had not told her because he had spent his entire life confusing secrecy with protection. If my sons read wealth only as possession, he wrote, let them inherit what can be counted. I am leaving you what can still be used. Her anger flared all over again at that. Used. Even now, after all his apologies, he was still writing like a man who believed provision could repair silence. But then she turned the page and found the only sentence that truly broke him open. I knew what they would do to you the moment I was gone, and because I knew it, and still did not stop it in life, I do not ask forgiveness. I ask only that you take what I should have placed in your hands years ago. Authority. Authority. Not comfort, not a room somewhere, not permission to survive. Authority. She sat alone in the blue room until dawn, reading trust papers, account summaries, old correspondence, and Miriam's journals, written in a quick, unsentimental hand. By sunrise, Evelyn understood 2 things with painful clarity. First, Benjamin and Daniel had inherited spectacle. She had inherited structure. Second, Hollow Creek had never been meant to save Arthur's conscience. It had been meant to outlive it. The attorney arrived that afternoon after a call so brief he sounded frightened by it. Yes, he said after 2 hours at the desk, with his glasses low on his nose and the stack of documents beside him. It's valid, entirely separate from probate. Your husband was meticulous. How much did he leave here? The attorney named a figure that made the room seem to tilt, but the number mattered less than the shape of it. Enough to restore the house. Enough to live. Enough to choose. He hesitated, then added, there is one more thing. The access road running through Hollow Creek supports the Western Service easement for hard distribution south. Evelyn looked at him. Benjamin and Daniel's industrial property? He nodded. Any major sale, redevelopment, or refinancing there will eventually require trustee consent. So that was the final seam in the fabric, the one Arthur had hidden where only patience would find it. For the first time since the reading, Evelyn did not feel wounded. She felt dangerous. But not in the way Benjamin and Daniel would understand. She did not want their house, their money, their late, oily remorse. What she wanted rose from Miriam's journals and from something in herself that had spent too many years asking to be useful only in private. By spring, Hollow Creek no longer looked forgotten. Cal repaired the windows and pretended not to notice when Evelyn paid him extra. Earl brought the furnace back from the dead while muttering biblical curses at the pipes. Nora appeared every Tuesday with soup, opinions, and a skill for making disasters sound temporary. The downstairs bedroom became Evelyn's. The parlor became bright again. The long dining room filled with trestle tables, donated chairs, and shelves of binders labeled in her own careful hand. Housing, benefits, legal aid, small business permits, estate basics, starting over. On Thursday evenings, women began to come. At first there were only 3. A retired bookkeeper whose son wanted her somewhere supervised. A waitress left with medical bills after her husband vanished to Florida. A woman of 72 who whispered the word divorce as if the walls might punish her for saying it aloud. Evelyn made tea. She listened. She showed them forms. She called people. She sat at the head of the old table in Miriam's house and watched shame loosen its grip, one practical conversation at a time. Then there were 7 women. Then 12. Then a local banker who agreed to explain credit repair without speaking to anyone like they were stupid. Then a church secretary with job listings. Then Claire, arriving one windy Saturday with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back, standing in the doorway with a box of kitchen things balanced against her hip. "I brought dishes," she said, "and folders, and I know I'm late." Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. Claire's face had Arthur's cheekbones and none of his caution. "Yes," Evelyn said softly, "you are." Claire's eyes filled at once. "I know." That afternoon they unpacked plates together in companionable awkward starts and stops. Near dusk, while they were stacking mugs in the pantry, Claire said without looking up, "He should have protected you in the open, not in a puzzle." Evelyn set down the cup in her hand. "Yes," she said, "he should have." It was enough. Not healing, not absolution, but truth spoken aloud has a way of clearing rot from the beans. Benjamin and Daniel came in June. They arrived in a black SUV that looked absurd against the gravel, wearing expressions polished for negotiation. Benjamin had a file. Daniel had a smile he mistook for charm. They did not comment on the restored porch, the herb beds, the women carrying boxes into the side entrance, the hand-painted sign by the drive that read Hollow Creek House. Benjamin got to the point in under 2 minutes. "There's a sale pending on Hart Distribution South," he said. "Large one, time-sensitive. Our council says we need your signature on an easement extension." Evelyn folded her hands on the kitchen table. "No." Daniel laughed once, thinly. "Let's not do theater. We're prepared to be generous." "It isn't theater," Evelyn said. "It's an answer." Benjamin leaned forward. "Name your price." The old Evelyn might have flinched, might have explained, might have softened the edges so men could hear her without bruising their pride. This Evelyn did not. "You still think this is about me getting something from you," she said. "That is the mistake your father spent his life teaching you." Daniel's smile vanished. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were the terms her attorney had drafted. Permanent protection for the creek and lower fields. A community endowment funded from the sale. No demolition rights near the house. Public acknowledgement that Hollow Creek House would remain independent and fully controlled by its trust. They would sign, or the easement would not be extended. Benjamin stared at the pages. "You're blackmailing us." Evelyn almost smiled. "No, I'm setting conditions on what is mine. Men like you call that blackmail whenever a woman stops asking." For one hot second, she thought Daniel might slam his fist on the table. Instead, he stood so abruptly the chair legs screamed against the floor. "You think this makes you powerful?" Evelyn looked past him through the open window, where 2 women from town were laughing as they carried tomato seedlings toward the garden. Then she looked back at him. "No," she said. "This is what power looks like after it stops needing your opinion." They signed 3 weeks later. Not graciously, not happily, but they signed.
By early autumn, the endowment was established, the creek protected, and Hollow Creek House had grown beyond anything Evelyn would once have permitted herself to imagine. There were workshops in the dining room, legal clinics in the blue room, a lending pantry in the old pantry, and on Wednesdays the kitchen filled with women who came in frightened and left with lists, phone numbers, casseroles, resumes, or simply the first full breath they'd taken in months. On the first anniversary of her arrival, Evelyn stood on the porch at sunset with Nora on one side and Claire on the other. The windows behind them glowed warm against the darkening trees. From inside came the clatter of dishes and the rise and fall of voices that no longer sounded careful. Claire touched her sleeve. "They're asking for you." Inside, someone had set flowers on a long table. Someone else had lit candles. The room was full. For years, Evelyn had mistaken being needed in silence for being loved. She had mistaken endurance for safety, obedience for peace, and late scraps of protection for devotion. Now, as she stepped back into the light and all those faces turned toward her, she understood the difference. This house hadn't rescued her. It had handed her back to herself.